Have you ever had a job that felt wrong? Not just the kind of wrong where you struggle to drag yourself out of bed, grumbling about your paycheck or your boss. I mean a job that gnaws at your bones, where your skin crawls and your gut whispers, you don't belong here. I have exactly that kind of job. I work alone as a lighthouse keeper in a place called Black Ridge Point. You've likely never heard of it, and honestly, that's for the best. It isn't on any popular map. Tourists don't wander here. Even the locals pretend it doesn't exist. And you know what? They're right. Because Black Ridge Point shouldn't exist. It's as if the Earth itself regrets letting it come into being. Usually, a lighthouse is meant to guide ships, to shine a light so they don't shatter against the rocks or get lost at sea. And that's what I thought I'd be doing when I took this position. I thought I'd be doing something good, useful, maybe even noble. But here, at this lighthouse, the light doesn't guide anyone. It locks something away. It keeps something inside. The beam isn't an invitation. It's a warning. And tonight is not like the others. Today, I found something I was never meant to find. I wasn't looking for anything unusual when I stumbled upon it. It was a standard night shift, one of hundreds I've spent in this cold, salt-eaten tower that groans with every gust of wind. You'd think that after 2 years I'd be used to everything, but this place always holds something in reserve, waiting until you feel safe to reveal it. That night, I decided to clean the storage room, just to break the endless silence. The room was piled with forgotten junk, cracked lanterns, rusted tools, thick manuals that hadn't been opened in decades. It smelled of mold, old wood, and something else, something acrid that made my throat itch. I was moving a stack of old logbooks kept by former keepers when I saw it. A brittle piece of yellowed paper wedged between the back wall and a shelf. I pulled it out. The paper crunched under my fingers. No title, no signature, just 7 rules scratched out in a trembling hand, as if the person who wrote them hadn't slept in weeks. And these rules, they didn't feel like a prank. They felt real. Exhausted. Lock the door promptly at 11 p.m. If you hear knocking after that, do not open it. The person you'd want to see won't be the one knocking. That was the first line. Simple, but it gave me chills. The light must remain on at all times. If it flickers, you must immediately turn it back on, even if you have to go outside. My heart sank. I'd done that before. I'd gone outside when the power cut out during storms. I thought it was normal, just part of the job. After midnight, do not look at the water. If you hear someone calling your name, they are lying. If the water tries to speak to you, shut up and do not answer. My breath hitched. I remembered a time I thought I heard someone screaming from the cliffs. I had almost called back. If you see a person standing on the edge of the cliff, do not acknowledge their presence, do not speak, do not approach. Cold sweat broke out on my back. I'd seen someone like that just a few weeks ago. I thought it was a trick of the light. You must leave exactly at 4 a.m. Not a minute earlier, not a minute later. I always left around 4, but never exactly at that time. I didn't know it was important. Perhaps it is. When thick fog rolls in, do not look out the window. You might see something you wouldn't want to. I thought about the nights when the fog became so dense I couldn't see my own hand in front of my face. I had stared out the window just to feel less lonely. Every new moon, the ship will return. Do not acknowledge it. Do not try to stop it. Do not look. This rule hit me the hardest. I hadn't seen any ship, but there was only a thin sliver of moon in the sky tonight. The new moon was approaching. I stood there, staring at the list. My hands trembled, clutching the edges of the paper. The air seemed to thicken, as if the room itself were holding its breath. At first I laughed, a weak, shaky sound.
thought it was just a twisted prank by a previous keeper, some creepy tradition to haze the newcomer. But the longer I held that paper, the louder the silence became. It was as if the entire lighthouse were watching me. Deep down, I understood. This wasn't just a warning. It was a challenge, a game. Without knowing it, I was already playing.
I tried to distract myself. I paced the main floor, picked up a dusty book from a side table, flipped through pages without seeing a single word. I even turned on a small battery-operated radio, hoping to catch some faint station from the mainland. But I heard only static. All the while, my hands wouldn't stop shaking. They trembled as if I'd been out in the cold too long, though the thick stone walls kept the wind out. It wasn't cold. It was fear. Cold, quiet, creeping fear. The first rule proved simple once I read it. Lock the door promptly at 11 p.m. Easy enough, right? Just turn the key and walk away. So I did. I walked to the heavy iron door at the bottom of the spiral staircase and turned the lock. Then I turned it again, just to be sure. The metal groaned in protest, as if it didn't want to be locked. That should have been my first clue. Then, exactly at 11:03 p.m., I heard it. A knock. 3 slow, distinct raps. Then silence. A silence so heavy it pressed against my ears, waiting to see what I would do. I froze, eyes wide. I hadn't expected it to actually happen. I didn't even remember hearing knocking before tonight. But now, as I truly listened, truly tuned in, it hit me. I had heard it before. Maybe subconsciously, but the sound had been tucked away deep in my brain, like a memory that wasn't actually mine. And then it dawned on me. This was happening every night. I just hadn't noticed. Or maybe I hadn't wanted to. I backed away from the door. The lighthouse stood on a cliff. There was no way someone could just climb up here. A narrow path led from the shore, and the rocks below were sharp and merciless. A person climbing that path would have been heard. Their footsteps would have echoed. But tonight, I heard nothing. And then, "Hey!" The voice hit me like a slap. Male, low, a bit rough, as if it hadn't been used in a long time. But something about it was wrong. It was like a song sung by someone who knew all the words, but didn't understand the meaning. Too even, too careful. I think I'm lost," the voice said. I didn't move. My jaw clenched so tight it ached. I stared at the door as if it could reach out and grab me. Lost? Here? At night? It made no sense. I don't know why, but I was certain. This voice could not belong to this place. "Please," it said again, softer this time, trying to sound weak. "I don't have much time. You have to let me in." I almost reached for the door. Something in me wavered. A reflex, an instinct, an old human habit of helping those in need. But then my gaze fell on the scrap of paper I'd shoved into my jacket pocket. Rule number 1. Do not open the door. My fingers curled tight against the fabric of my jacket. I stepped back. The voice continued, pleading, begging, insisting, every word more convincing than the last. It tried to sound scared, then kind, then angry. But I stood motionless, my mouth shut tight. Then, without warning, the voice simply stopped. Silence. Not even a breath. And then, footsteps. But these weren't the footsteps that echoed on the stone path. No, these were different. No crunch of gravel, no rustle of bushes. Just a soft, rhythmic beat, as if feet were stepping on empty air. They didn't head back down the path. They didn't dissolve into the forest. They just walked into the pitch-black night that stretched out beyond the lighthouse, like an endless sea of nothingness. I didn't breathe. Then, something slipped under the door. A quiet scraping sound, like paper on stone. I stared at the gap beneath the door. A slip of paper. Blood-stained. Not just soiled, but soaked through with dark, rusty brown spots. I hesitated. My fingers hovered over it, not daring to touch. It could be a trick, a trap, but leaving it there felt worse. So, carefully, I picked it up. The edges were sticky, the smell metallic, acrid, nauseating. I slowly unfolded it. There were words. Trembling, handwritten lines, just like the rules, but smaller, less legible. I began to read, but I didn't get far, because the moment my eyes hit the second line, the light flickered. Not softly, not smoothly. A sharp, sudden glitch. On, off, on. And for the first time that night, I realized I was not alone. I glanced at the clock. 12 a.m. Midnight. The moment my eyes locked onto the time, the lighthouse beam, my only real protection against the nightmares hiding in Black Ridge Point, flickered sharply. Once, twice, and then darkness. Complete, absolute darkness. The beam, which usually swept smoothly across the black ocean, simply vanished. Just like that. No warning, no hum of dying power. It just went out. And in that instant, something deep inside me knew. This wasn't a malfunction. This was unnatural. Rule number 2. I remembered it vividly now. The light must remain on at all times. If it flickers, you must immediately turn it back on, even if you have to go outside. An icy charge of panic pierced my chest. My throat constricted. My heart hammered so fast it felt like it would break my ribs. I felt around on the nearest table, grabbed my flashlight with trembling hands, and bolted for the stairs. The old spiral steps groaned under my feet as I raced up to the lantern room. The cold hit me halfway up. An unnatural cold. Not just the chill of sea air. It was wrong. By the time I reached the top, I could see my breath. Thick white clouds erupted from my mouth like smoke from a fire. My fingers were already numb. The metal railing burned my skin like ice. And then, the light above me dimmed to a faint glow and died. Everything plunged into darkness. I clicked on the flashlight. A weak yellow beam cut through the room like a knife, shaking in my hand. I aimed it at the generator. My heart hammered, and the sound of it filled my ears louder than the wind outside. I flipped the main switch. Nothing. No sparks. No hum. Nothing. My breath caught. I moved to the backup generator. Hope clung to me like a life preserver. But something stopped me. Not a sound. Not a touch. Just a feeling. That same crawling sensation that makes your skin pull tight. The feeling of being watched. That there was someone there. And then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw it. Something was standing outside, motionless, right on the edge of the cliff, where the light usually didn't reach. It wasn't a person. It looked like a person if you were squinting from far away and had never seen humans before. An outline, a shape, but everything about it was wrong. Too tall, too thin. The arms hung in a way that made my stomach churn. And where a face should have been, there was just a blurry patch of swirling blackness. No eyes, no mouth, just a suggestion of a head, rotating like smoke trapped in a jar. It didn't move. It just stood there, watching. Watching me, or maybe watching the lighthouse. In any case, the message was clear. The light was out, and it was waiting. I turned to the generator. My hands were barely responsive from the cold. They slipped off the handles, once, twice, before I managed to grab the ignition switch. I looked back over my shoulder. The figure had taken a step forward. Panic overwhelmed me. I slammed my palm against the ignition. Come on, come on, come on. With a loud roar, the generator coughed, sputtered, and finally bellowed to life. The light above me flashed. It didn't flicker. It blazed, piercing the foggy night like a sword of fire. The entire room filled with a warm, blinding glow. I turned and looked at the cliff. The nausea that had been rising in my throat vanished. The figure was gone. Not a trace, not a footprint, not a whisper in the wind. Just the night, and that cursed, endless sea. What was that? I whispered, as if saying it aloud would make it real. My heart beat wildly in my chest, loud and uneven, like a drum of alarm. Thoughts raced in circles, refusing to settle. Each passing second made the silence around me heavier, as if it were pressing on my lungs. I tried to distract myself, clumsily moving from one unfinished task to another, checking oil levels, adjusting the beam, wiping surfaces that were already clean. Anything to keep my hands busy and quiet my thoughts. But no matter what I did, that sharp sense of unease only grew. People don't go to work at a lighthouse for fun. Nobody dreams of spending months in isolation in a cold, creaky tower by the sea, cut off from the world. You don't wake up one day and say, "Oh, I want to be alone with the foghorns and sea spray." No, you end up here because you're running, hiding, escaping.
My reason was simple. I had nothing left, nothing to hold on to, nothing to keep me in the world I once called home. I grew up in a small, quiet town on the edge of a reservation, a place where stories hung in the air, and people still nodded at the invisible. My grandfather was a proud, wrinkled old man who had seen too much and said too little. He would sit by the fire and tell us stories that felt more like warnings than fairy tales. He spoke of spirits that didn't stay dead, of voices calling from the water, and a fog that carried something more than just moisture. As a boy, I brushed it off. I thought it was just part of our culture, a way to scare children into behaving. But then, the accident. My wife, my little son, they vanished. One rainy night, a slick highway, and just nothing. After that, everything my grandfather said sounded less like myth and more like memory. All I wanted was to disappear, to stop hearing the echo of toys that were no longer played with, to stop seeing her mug in the cupboard and his boots by the door. I needed silence, distance, emptiness.
So when the job at the Black Ridge Lighthouse came up, I accepted without hesitation. The pay was good, the requirements were few, and best of all, no one asked questions. But now I'm starting to wonder, did I choose this place, or did it choose me? I tried to push these thoughts away, told myself I was just tired, that grief does strange things to the mind. I sat down to have coffee again. The cup rattled in my hand. Then, the old grandfather clock struck 12:30 a.m., and I heard it. "Hey," I called out, more out of habit than hope, but the hair on my arms stood on end. The voice was outside, by the water, and it said my name, clearly, softly, familiarly. My entire body tensed, my mouth went dry. Rule number 3 from the Black Ridge Keeper's Manual: after midnight, do not look at the water. At first, I used to joke about the rules, laugh at them like some strange prank for newcomers when I first arrived. But I had followed them always, until now. Because this voice, This voice wasn't just any voice. It was my mother's voice. And she's been gone for 10 years.
No, I whispered. But even as I said it, my legs began to move, as if they didn't care about the rules, as if they belonged to someone else. I walked to the small circular window, the one that offered a perfect view of the sea. I didn't even realize I was crying until the salt from my tears burned the corners of my mouth. Come here, please. I need you. It was her voice, the way she gently called me when dinner was ready, the way she comforted me when I cried after nightmares. My hands gripped the windowsill, my knees locked, my brain screamed, "Don't!" But my heart whispered, "What if?" Then I saw something. The water wasn't calm. It was moving, almost twitching, as if in a panic. It wasn't approaching through the water. It was pushing it away. The water churned, swirled, and retreated in slow, hesitant waves, as if it wanted nothing to do with what was rising from below. I couldn't breathe, because it was beginning to take shape. Not a man, not a woman, not any creature I had ever seen or read about, but a living form, irregular, impossible. It had no place in this world. No, what the hell is this? I whispered. My voice broke, and for the first time in my life, I understood that water, the very thing we need to exist, that brings life, peace, and tranquility, can be terrifying. Oh God, oh Lord. My survival instincts kicked in sharp and fast. My eyes clamped shut without my permission. And then, a sound. A scraping right against the glass. Slow, scratching, like fingernails one after another. I froze, not breathing. The only thing I could hear was the pounding of blood in my ears. Then, silence. No voice, no whisper. When I dared to open my eyes, the window was fogged with thick condensation, and on the glass, as clear as day, was written, "Do not break the rules." By this point, I was broken, completely devastated, both inside and out. My nerves were like exposed wires, sparking at every sound. My fingers wouldn't stop shaking, even when I squeezed them into fists. My chest felt tight, as if something heavy had settled inside and refused to move. I told myself that if I could just make it to morning, everything would be fine. Maybe all of this would feel like a dream, a terrible, twisted dream. I just needed to hold on. But my body no longer believed my thoughts. I was tired and afraid in a way no human should ever be afraid. I don't even remember how the hours passed after what happened at the window. One moment it was just past midnight, and then almost 4. My mind stopped tracking time, as if it knew it didn't want to be awake for what was coming next. At 3:45 a.m., the world changed again. It started with a smell, damp and heavy, like rotting seaweed and wet ropes. Then came the fog, thick, too thick. It rolled in as if it had a mind of its own, enveloping the lighthouse in heavy blankets. So light, I could barely see the edge of my own table. This wasn't the kind of fog that just obscured your view. It consumed sound, too. Everything became muffled, quiet. I tried not to look up. I really tried. I looked at the floor, blinked rapidly, focused on the beating of my own heart. But then I heard it. Wood. Old, cracking wood, under pressure. Then another sound. Metallic, low and dull. It rang out in the distance like a bell, swung by an invisible hand. A ship's bell. I held my breath. Carefully, like a child hiding under the covers, I turned my head just enough to glance out the window. The fog was so thick I thought I wouldn't see anything. But then, faintly, like a memory rising from a deep sleep, I saw it. A ship, barely distinguishable, like a shadow in the fog. It glided across the ocean's surface too smoothly, too quietly,
without splashes, without waves around the hull. It didn't disturb the water at all. It just moved silently, as if it weren't part of the world we know. Its sails were torn, fluttering softly like old fabric left to rot. The ship's wood was cracked, faded, and yet it held together, as if stubbornly refusing to sink. It was wrong. This ship didn't belong to this time. Perhaps no time. And then I saw the figures. They stood along the deck, motionless, watching. They looked like people, but not quite. Some had no arms. One had no face. Just smooth, pale skin stretched over where features should have been. Several stood with mouths open, wide and empty. Their jaws hung loose in endless screams, but none of them made a sound. They just watched. Each of them looked at the lighthouse, at me.
I froze, unable to look away. My skin pulled tight. My legs went numb. I couldn't run, couldn't even blink. Then one of the figures moved. It raised a hand, not in greeting, not in peace. It pointed straight at me. I almost vomited. My stomach twisted. My mind screamed, demanding explanations. But deep down, where I didn't want to look, I already knew everything. This wasn't some forgotten, scary story passed from one drunken sailor to another. This was real. All of it. The rules, the whispering, the scratching on the window, the voice that sounded like my mother's, the ship. It returned again and again and again. And now I understood why. The blood-stained paper I had found earlier that night, crumpled and shoved behind the logs, told the truth. I didn't understand it before, didn't want to understand. But now everything made perfect, horrific sense. The last keeper, he made one mistake. Just one. He allowed the light to go out, if even for a minute. And in that minute, the sea took what it wanted. The ship crashed. People died. Now every new moon, the ship returned, seeking, desiring, not for answers, but for vengeance. And if it couldn't find him, the one who failed, it took the one who came in his place. Me. My legs gave out, but I held onto the table. I turned away from the window. I didn't want to see it vanish. I didn't want to watch those lifeless faces melt back into the fog. But I knew it had vanished back into the sea. For now. And something inside me whispered the truth I didn't want to speak aloud. It will come back. And next time, it might not leave empty-handed. I didn't allow myself to breathe again until my boots touched the damp stone outside the lighthouse at exactly 4 a.m. The moment I stepped into the open air, my lungs filled with sharp, cold air that hit me like a slap. The sky was beginning to change. Not yet dawn, not yet morning. Just that eerie shade of gray that makes everything seem uncertain. The fog still clung to everything. Not as thick as before, but heavy enough that the world still felt muffled and distant. As if the fog didn't want to release the night. As if it wanted to keep me there just a little longer.
I turned slowly. Behind me, the lighthouse stood tall and silent. The golden beam of its rotating light cut through the fog clearly, like a sword fighting off the darkness. It was steady, reliable, a symbol of safety for anyone at sea. But for me, it didn't feel like safety anymore. It felt like a warning. I had done what I was told. I hadn't broken any rules. I kept the light, kept my eyes mostly where they were supposed to be, didn't listen too closely to the voices I wasn't supposed to hear. I survived the night. But at what cost? And how long will I be able to do this? I stood there, staring at the rotating light as if it could give me answers. For the last 2 years, I'd told myself that this place was peace. Told myself that I'd found salvation in the silence, in the isolation. I told myself I'd run here to find quiet after my life had been torn apart. But what if that was never true? What if I didn't come here to run away from something? What if I was cold here, The thought slipped into my mind, slow and nauseating. What if I wasn't just hiding from pain, but punished by it? Maybe this wasn't a job. Maybe it was a sentence. Maybe Black Ridge Point wasn't offering solitude. Maybe it was offering a cage of fog and regret. A place where people were sent to forever feel the echo of every mistake made at sea. And suddenly, something became painfully clear. It didn't matter how accurately I followed the rules. It didn't matter how faithfully I stuck to the routine, how bright I kept the light, how quiet I kept my thoughts. One day, the lighthouse wouldn't protect me. One day, they won't let me leave.